We are recording the interview of Robert Brocklehurst. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tkach from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 10:30 on the 27th of April, 2018. Bob?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, glad to be here.
So let's start off with where and when were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan on July the 17th, 1920.
And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Well, my mother was Alma Evans from Kentucky, and my dad was James Brocklehurst from Ohio, and they raised 4 children. I was the oldest. Mom was kept house, of course, and my dad was a sheet metal worker.
Do you have any siblings?
I have had one brother who was a P-51 pilot also, and now deceased, and 2 sisters, both now deceased. So I had 2 sisters and 1 brother.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your brother also served. Do you have any other family members that served in the military?
Well, of the present family, my middle son was a helicopter pilot, Richard, in Vietnam. Flew the Huey, sprayed Agent Orange, was awarded quite a few medals for his activities, and had 2 or 3 open heart surgeries, and finally died of a heart attack, all due to Agent Orange. Mother's son David was in the Navy for a while on destroyers as an ensign and ensign senior grade. Lieutenant. And my daughter, Jean Vahue, married a man who wanted to be in the Air Force because I was. He was too tall, was a navigator in F-4s, and he and his pilot shot down the first MiG up over or near Hanoi, and there's a plaque to that effect in the Air Force Museum across the street here.
Wow. So quite a family legacy of military service.
My dad was World War I also.
Okay.
And all my cousins and contemporaries were, everybody was in uniform in World War II that could walk.
Well, we appreciate all their service. So let's talk about what were you doing before you joined the service?
Well, after high school, I worked on a stock farm for a while, and I worked in a vagabond coach manufacturing company. And when I seen a big billboard that said, "Come on down to Detroit, Michigan, and take the physical to be an Army Air Corps flying cadet," I said, "That's for me." Always wanted to fly. Went down, passed the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Found out that you had to have 2 years of college afterwards. I didn't have any, but they said I could pass the equivalency exam that the Air Force gave or the Army Air Corps gave every few years, and they were going to give one that September of 1940. I went back, quit my job, went to the University of Michigan, bought 2 years worth of college books, studied them. That's all I did was study from February to September. Went to Selfridge, took the exam, 3 exams a day for 3 days, and passed.
Wow.
And I went to work for Broen Sheet Metal in Detroit, and December got orders to report in February to Hatbox Field at Muskogee, Oklahoma for primary flight training.
Mm-hmm.
And some 1,500 young men at many different places who went to the primary flight schools, and when we got there they said, "Look around because 1/3 of you won't be here when you finish." And that was true. We finally graduated 991 out of the roughly 1,500 that started.
Mm-hmm.
We flew PT-19s, Fairchild and Stearman PT-17s for 70 hours in basic, in primary. Went on to basic. I went to Randolph Air Force Base and or Randolph Field then it was, of course, and we flew BT-9s and BT-13s and got 70 hours there. And I went to Kelly Field, right in the edge of San Antonio, and we got another 70 hours there in AT-6s.
Mm-hmm.
It's September 26, 41. We graduated as second lieutenants in the Army Air Corps Reserve and with the rating of pilot.
Mm-hmm. So what was that feeling like when you finally graduated pilot school?
Well, when I graduated from flying school.
Yes.
Well, was happy to get through it because the primary and basic was full of hazing.
Mm-hmm.
Real pretty tough hazing back in those days, and you couldn't go outside until you soloed unless you were with somebody. You had to find another cadet. You couldn't go from one building to the next or to the flight line or anything without having somebody who hadn't soloed. And at night you were woke up by the classmates, studies, upper class, studies interfered with and stuff and all sorts of things to see if you were tough enough to be a pilot, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But we graduated 991. We were sent to just about every Army airfield there was to fly fighters, bombers, transports. A few were retained to be instructors. And when war was declared, why, we lost about 251 through the war years out of our 991.
Mm-hmm.
I was assigned to Selfridge Field, Michigan, to the 2nd Squadron of the 52nd Group, and our squadron commander was Jack Chenault, one of the 7 sons of General Claire Chenault of Chinese fame. And we'd seen this P-40 land before and way back, come in low and fast and land on 2 wheels and screech to stop at the end of the runway. And we'd go, oh, like, man, that's a hot airplane. And there I was assigned to P-40s. Jack Chenault said, this is an airplane. It's got 2 wheels up front and a tail wheel in the back. You got to stall it like you do any other airplane and land it on all 3 wheels. And he taught us that way and gave us our personal checkouts at the cockpit before he'd slap you on the back and say, take off.
Mm-hmm.
But that saved a bunch of our lives because the Saturday after December 7th, the 2nd Squadron was on a troop train headed for Sacramento, California. We picked up P-40s from the depot there, had all sorts of problems with them, and they come available by 2s and 3s, and I don't know how they drew the lots, but I was towards the end of it, and but we lost 6 of the 24 airplanes on the way up due to various types of accidents, and 1 pilot and 1 airplane after we got to Alaska. I didn't land in Alaska until March the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
We were all with the last group coming up in there, and we were stationed at Anchorage, and I was there with the 11th. We became the 11th, and the 18th was up there with P-36s. The 18th Squadron had P-36s had been shipped up in the hold of a ship, and they had put them together, and they'd been flying up there for about a year. And due to our inexperience in Alaska and junior 2nd lieutenants, they took half of the 11th, transferred to the 18th with the P-40s, half the 18th came over to the 11th with their P-36s, and when we got to when they got to each squadron, then the senior second lieutenants took our P-40s away and made us fly the P-36s for a while.
Mm-hmm. So when you joined the Army Air Corps, did you think that you were going to go to war? This is before Pearl Harbor.
Had no idea of it, really. Had no idea. And we were before the draft, so that everybody was a volunteer and wanted to fly.
What were your thoughts when you found out about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was flying training in combat Michigan in Stearman's against another pilot that Sunday afternoon, and when we came back to land, there was airplanes all over Selfridge Fields. You couldn't land, and we didn't know why. But no radios in our airplanes, and we learned about when we found out about it. And there was just general excitement, I think. The newspapers were more, all sorts of stories and stuff, and then I think when a week later, when we found ourselves on a troop train, the entire squadron headed for California, and going to Alaska, and we were told that they expected the Japanese to maybe come through the Aleutian Islands and down the chain, and we were to get up there and help stop them with the 18th. And when the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor in June of '42, they ran into a little more opposition than they figured. Dutch Harbor people had some notice of the flights coming in. The anti-aircraft was busy. A couple of P-40s from, I don't know where they came from, got in the act down there. And so the Japanese then went backed up and landed at Kiska. And didn't get any further than Kiska out towards the western end of the Aleutians. But there wasn't much up to stuff in the Anchorage, Alaska, Aleutian area to stop them at that time if they had decided to come on. Am I talking too long?
No, you're
asked?
No, that's great. So where were you at this time? You were in the Aleutian Islands?
I went to Alaska. We ended up at Anchorage right away. I was transferred to the 18th. The 11th stayed at Anchorage, and we moved to Kodiak Island.
Okay.
Then I got picked with another, I can't think of his name right now. To go down to the station, pick up another P-40. I had a rather successful flight up with some unusual circumstances. So I got picked to go back and pick up another one, and got back up into Anchorage about early September of '42. And then I was, in the 18th that I was with, had moved out to Cold Bay then, from Kodiak Island. And then later on I got Elmer Booth was the guy. Elmer Booth and Jake Dixon and myself got sent back. This is about the early '43, maybe late '42, to go back to Anchorage at Elmendorf Air Force Base and start a brand new squadron, the 344th, which we did. In the meantime, then, the 18th, the 11th had moved to Umnak Island, further down the chain. The 18th and the 11th then moved on into Amchitka to fight the Japanese down there. Well, we went back and got this new squadron, got a bunch of second lieutenants in, taught them to fly the P-40s, and then we moved down to Cold Bay and then Umnak. And then around July '43, we leapfrogged for the 344th from Umnak out to Attu, where the Japanese had previously landed, and we went out there to help. Our army was still fighting in 3 pockets, and we got out there with the 344 Squadron, but we could only take 6 airplanes in there because there wasn't room to land at the park anymore or operate. And the rest of my squadron I put on Shemya, and I also kept 2 to 4 airplanes on alert at Dutch Harbor. So I had 3 locations and I was a squadron commander then.
Okay.
And we got out there, and there wasn't any air opposition. And due to the winds and stuff, and we talked to the Army people that there was no way we could go strafing or drop bombs after we got there. So I missed the action on Kiska, and came back to the States in September of '43.
Okay. Well, would you fly any missions? Would you do any?
We flew alerts. We flew scrambles. Never seen a Japanese airplane. They were always either, if there were any on the radar now, we're on the radar, where they were either disappeared in clouds. You see, you got about 250 days of rain, snow, clouds, and fog up there in the Aleutians. And so anything we ever chased, we never caught.
What was daily life like out there?
Well, you're at the first, on the 18th, first went into Cold Bay. We lived in the tents, and then they dumped the material for Quonset huts alongside of us, and we built our own Quonset hut. And we had sort of an oversized one, or what, I don't know, the 24 pilots lived in the Quonset hut, double-stacked bunks. A guy came in with a burner, about 4 burners on it, cooked our meals on it. We ate there and we slept there, and we stood our alerts there. We had butter sent to us. It was desert butter and syrup cans like you used to buy your pancake syrup in, you know, the big ones. And it looked like actual grease you used on farm machinery. It wouldn't melt on hot pancakes. Powdered eggs, and we lived in that Quonset hut for the rest of the time there until we finally got some mission huts in there, and had lots of Spam to eat.
Would you keep in contact with family and friends back home?
Well, mail was irregular at that time. If you got mail, or when you usually got 2 or 3 letters at a time, over maybe a month or so, and mail going out was heavily censored, and you found out that routine stuff we thought was routine, our letters were all cut in pieces where the censor had taken them out, and doing some censor stuff, we had to do it. You find people would write under the postage stamp where they were and stuff, and but mail was very irregular. No other voice communication at all back with the families.
Did you do anything for fun or recreation?
Well, there wasn't any. There was not only us, only the Air Force and the Army at each place also too. At Cold Bay, an interesting thing is when we came back from either an alert or whatever, the Army asked us to buzz their positions, so their gun emplacements, and work them over. And we did that. And we enjoyed it, and I guess they enjoyed it. They finally got a C-47 up there towing targets for the anti-aircraft people to shoot at. And these guys shot every target off the C-47s that they brought up. They were that good from tracking us in our P-40s, buzzing them all the time. Gee, I'd forgotten about that until just now.
So when, what was it like coming home in '43?
Well, let's see. I think we got a ride down somewhere into Canada in a troop train. I'm not trained, and I had to take this train to Detroit, Michigan. And of course, there was gas rationing. My folks didn't have a telephone at that time. Of course, I was married, and my wife didn't live with her dad. Her mother had died, didn't have a phone, so I got a taxi cab as far out Grand River as I could. Then I hitchhiked, got back in town somewhere towards midnight. A guy gave me a ride there, dropped me off in town, and I put my B4 bag on somebody's porch I knew, and walked home and knocked on the door. It was great. And my oldest son was had just got home from the hospital, so I got to see him for about a week.
Wow, oh, that's pretty incredible. I imagine that was a wonderful feeling.
Yep.
So, what was next for you after coming home?
Well, that's that's when I came back to pick up the P-40. Then when I came back in September of '43, went to Richmond, Virginia, and checked out in P-47s, a course there. And then we went up to what was Camp Springs, which is now Andrews Air Force Base, and got new second lieutenants from flying school, and we trained as a new outfit, and then I kept 2 airplanes on alert there for Washington, D.C. in case anything came up, and then we got our orders to go to Europe, and we had our trucks packed, everything packed, said goodbye to the wives and children, and we're already to leave the next morning for our port call. Got a telegram that night, stop, don't come. We don't need any more units over here. We don't have room for them. Send us all your second lieutenants that are checked out in the P-47s, and we're going to send you another batch, and you're now replacement training unit. Keep your senior pilots there who had been overseas on a tour already. So that's what we did then. So I never got to Europe.
So what was your job like there? Did you?
Sorry?
You said you were a training unit?
We became what they called a RTU, a replacement training unit. I was, I think the title was Deputy for Operations or and Training, and I was the Deputy Base Commander at Camp Springs Army Airfield under a William L. Boyd. He was to me, he looked old, was old, but he was a Bloom pilot. And he was the base commander at Camp Springs Army Airfield. And I was there when the name was changed to Andrews Air Force Base after a deceased general. And Mrs. Andrews was there when we christened the base. I was her escort.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And then how long were you there?
Oh, I don't know now. I think I ended up from there going to, I went to Air Force, had me go back to the University of Michigan and study mathematics from '47 to '49. And then I went to Okinawa until '51. I was assistant deputy and then deputy for operations of 20th Air Force. They had an outfit in Japan, in Tokyo, that would send us orders. And we just finished a 3-day exercise, had our B-29s up from Guam, and we sent the first B-29s up there to bomb at the Korean War. And then we also sent out the Typhoon hunters, just like they do today in B-29s. I did go out with them a couple of times. Very interesting people. I came back from there to
Tell me about, let's go back a little bit. Tell me about what the feeling was like when World War II was over.
Pardon?
When World War II was over, what was that feeling like?
Well, I, I, you know, everybody still wanted to get in the act and stuff, but everybody was rejoicing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had the soldiers, airmen, anybody that was killed, they got a gold, mother's got a gold star in the window, and there was a lot of gold stars at that time, and you all felt sorry about it. A lot of us, I was fortunate I didn't lose any cousins or future husbands to my sisters, but I knew a lot of people who did lose cousins and brothers and things in World War II, and it was, we were all very glad it was stopped, over with, and that we won.
And you said your brother was a P-51 pilot?
But my brother flew P-51s over in Europe, yes.
And what did he see any combat or action?
Yes, but I don't know his story. He never would talk much about it. He's deceased now, but he just stayed in during the war years and got out.
Were you concerned for him at all, or were you?
Well, certainly, you know, a brother over there, and the family was, and of course, for me up in Alaska and the Aleutians and stuff. Interesting. Any story you read of the battles, actions, statistics, to me they vary. So if I quote statistics to you from one book, somebody else is going to say, no, that's wrong. They're different. One source says that the Army Air Corps lost shot down 24,000 enemy aircraft. And their accident ratio, accidents of our own accidents, not combat losses, were about 4 to 1. For every airplane we lost, we shot down 4 enemy. We go to the Aleutian weather. One source says we had about 45, 46 airplanes lost direct to combat, and 185 lost by accident to weather, just a reverse ratio, for example. Different flying up there in the Aleutians than it was than any place else in a way.
Okay, let's go back to Korea here. You were in Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa?
I was at Kadena.
Yeah. And then what was your mission there?
Well, we had a F-80 outfit on Naha, and our B-29s were at Guam. And the Air Force, 20th Air Force headquarters was at Kadena, under General Alvin Kincaid at that time. And we would bring our B-29s, I'm talking the 49 to 51 time frame, we'd bring our B-29s up from Guam, and we would run missions against Japan, and 5th Air Force with fighters would come out and in our war game attack the bombers and stuff. And we'd do that for about once a year for exercise. And we had just finished one of those when the Korean thing started.
And then once the Korean War started, what was your role there?
Well, I was, at that time, I was Deputy for Operations 20th Air Force, and we would get orders from Tokyo of what they wanted the B-29s to do, who were still down at Kadena, and we would do it. We'd get them ready and send them up there. I was not allowed I wasn't a B-29 driver. I was a fighter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to go with them. I'll just put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Was your family with you in Kadena, or were they still back in the States?
The family had come over. They had their orders,
Mm-hmm.
so they allowed them to come on over, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the family was there for maybe 50, 51, 2 years maybe.
Okay. And then, so what was your next step after that?
I came back from there, was assigned to Chicago. While looking for a place to live, they got word from our Eastern Air Defense Force at Newburgh, New York,
Mm-hmm.
Stewart Air Force Base, to have me come in there for an interview. So I went in there for an interview, and they kept me there as the deputy base commander. And I was there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and the base commander was reassigned, and I became base commander, and I was there for 3 or 4 years, I think,
Mm-hmm.
as base commander of Stewart Air Force Base.
Okay. So what was life like there? Was that a good experience being the base commander?
Yes, I had a lot of fun running it and learning it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was. That's where I got to fly the C-47 and the C-45
Mm-hmm.
time. Although we had some fighters on the base, but you had to go through the fighter program in order to fly them,
Mm-hmm.
and but I had big budget there to work with, and a lot of building program expansion and things. And we also supported a number of radar sites along the East Coast. And we had a big warehouse filled with all sort of electronic parts to support them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a big supply base for these small radar sites up and down the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Among having the fighters and the headquarters of Eastern Air Defense Force was on Stewart Air Force Base.
Okay. How different was it going from the fighters to flying the C-47s?
Well, the C-47, the old Goonie Bird, was a great airplane. It was a
Mm-hmm.
nice airplane to fly. I got a lot of instrument time in the airplane. I just loved to fly it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great airplane to fly.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, stable, steady. You had 8 hours of fuel in it, a lot different than the fighters had,
Uh-huh.
and moved a lot of cargo. And I would, even when I was going to the University of Michigan, I had to go to Selfridge Field on weekends, or a couple of weekends a month to fly, and the C-47, occasionally a C-45 was what they would give us to fly, and
Mm-hmm.
The guys over there knew me, and they would usually have loads for me to take in that C-47, because they knew that I would, if I got over there Friday night, I'd be back on Sunday night for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Return to be back in school on Monday.
Uh-huh.
So I got quite a bit of time in it.
Okay. So then after Newburgh, New York, where was your next move?
After Newburgh, New York, I went to the F-86D school and the T-33 instrument school at Tyndall Air Force Base. And between the F-86D and the T-33 jet, which I ended up doing most of flying with because I was a staff officer, I think I got maybe 1,200 hours of jet time in the 86D and the T-33.
What was the experience like now flying a jet versus?
It's entirely different. Of course, you're moving a lot faster, and with your fuel. I remember the T-33 particularly had 800 gallons of fuel, and it took you 200 gallons to start up, take off, and get to altitude. And depending on weather and alternates and stuff, you wanted maybe 200 gallons left at 27,000 feet where you were cruising maybe to land and stuff. So you had about 400 gallons of usable fuel. And you would plan that. You could plan your things really good in the jets, so you could hit your ETAs, your estimated time of arrival at checkpoints. You'd hit them within about a minute usually, and you're covering lots of ground. I enjoyed instrument flying. I enjoyed flying all the airplanes. The P-40 and the 47 were different types of airplanes. If I said the jets were all the same, I don't know, that might be a true statement, it might not, but your greater speeds and things like that. You flew a P-40 or a P-51 or a P-47, they handled different. They flew at different altitudes, and it was a different type of flying between them and the jets.
So after that school, where'd you go? After learning how to fly the T-33s and the F-86?
Oh, well, I was going to Chicago to take over a F-86 squadron, and there was a new deputy base commander, a deputy commander of Eastern Air Defense Force at Stewart Air Force Base, where I had left to go to school. I didn't know him. Can't think of it. He called me one day personally and said he knew of me as being the base commander there, and that they were opening up a new base at K.I. Sawyer, Michigan. And he said there are pieces out at Air Defense Command at Colorado Springs. There's pieces down in Wisconsin. There's pieces here. And he said, nobody's got it organized. Would you mind taking over that responsibility and being the commander? His words exactly. Well, what do you say to Brigadier General? And he said, I know you wanted to go flying. I've heard you like to fly, but I really appreciate you doing that for us. I said, okay, sir, I'll do that. And that's why I went up there. But from the time I finished school, I had my orders from school and got up there. He had a heart attack and died.
Wow.
So I ended up there with, I finally got a C-47 and I think a C-45 to fly up there because we're just opening the base. And as fast as we would build the building, we'd knock it down to enlarge it because more stuff was coming in, and finally SAC was coming in and things. I don't know, from there maybe I went to Air Force Command and Staff School at Norfolk. I went to Pentagon for 5 years. I went up to Alaskan Air Command as Director of Plans and Programs.
What was your experience like with your 5 years at the Pentagon?
5 years at the Pentagon? I think the correct expression is that a lot of us didn't like it. I was down in the basement in operations and had what they called a airbase use job of how air bases were to be used. In fact, there was a presidential appointed committee called the Air Coordinating Committee, and it had different panels, and one was the Airport Use Panel, and that was consisted of the CAA before the FAA, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and the Civil Pilots Association, all members of this group, was very senior people, but the senior people all had working members that did the work for them. So I was a working member for the Air Force. We met, and we would go around to different places in the United States where the civil aviation wanted into our Air Force bases to use them. We didn't want to mix the civil aircraft with our military aircraft, and it was mostly saying no, except at a few places. But and that was just part of the overall job of keeping track of the bases and what we would do in wartime use in bases and units.
And then you went, is it back to Alaska, or?
I went back to Alaska from the Pentagon from 62 roughly to 66, 67 time frame, I forget. I was up there during the Alaska earthquake, and I was director of things. They planned some programs for Alaskan Air Command at that time, and then I came back to Systems Command. You could choose a retirement station, and that's what a retirement station was. Flew the T-33 up in Alaska, so if you're on the staff, you can't fly the tactical airplane. So, and the same way back in Andrews, I was Director of War Plans, ran the command post there, also ran the command post up in Alaska when anything serious come up or in our exercises. And then retired in 68.
All right.
But
yeah, go ahead.
you know, when we graduated, we were class 41G. This is a 41G helmet. It would be a cap. It would be an official cap if it didn't have the 41G on it. But our class organized after the war. 41G had reunions every year. We had our 75th reunion at Fort Walton Beach, Florida. At that time, we were down to maybe 15, 16 guys left alive. Now we're down to 11 guys left alive. The youngest is 97, it would be 98 this year, and the oldest is 100 of the guys that we're still in contact with. We think there's another half a dozen somewhere, but we haven't heard whether they're still living or whatever. We met what used to be just a Saturday, then it got stretched out, and we were meeting Wednesday through Saturday in the last couple of dozen years at different places. And wives started coming. Children started coming to it, and even some grandchildren. And towards the last few years, we'd have maybe 40 to 50 people out we got down to only 2 41G members that could travel. And for our 75th reunion, then we decided that we'd have to quit it. We paid dues of $5 a year for our newsletter and everything else. Maybe made a little money off of our reunions, but the class had voted to give what was in our treasury to the Air Force Museum. And yesterday, the Secretary Treasurer, Lee Henson, whose dad was a 41G, presented a check of $4,900 to the Air Force Museum from 41G.
That's a pretty incredible experience. And
oh, it was good, and like I said, we had a lot of esprit de corps then, and you know, Jeremy, I should have mentioned too, the quality of the enlisted people. that we had back in those early days. These guys were good. We had a line chief that, man, anything that was done, it got done, no matter if it was line chief work or not. He was an old timer like that, you know. And but all the crews on alert, helping us get in the airplanes on scrambles and things like that. Work just got done like mad. Our airplanes were ready all the time. And I can't say enough about the quality and the experience of our enlisted people, not just the crews, the whole works at that time.
Did you continue flying after the service?
No, I didn't. I thought of the airlines didn't want fighter pilots then. Since then, they found out maybe fighter pilots weren't so bad after all, flying those multi-engine airplanes. I took, let's see, 68, went up, and my family, I went up to Michigan, put on a 50th wedding anniversary for my folks. 2 older boys and I canoed about 7 different rivers in Michigan. Did an income tax, ran an income tax office for a while, and then met a man who had invented this artificial marble sink top, as you see in the bathrooms. Only he used real ground marble, beautiful tops. And so I started working with them and then became sales manager of that company, Jesmar Marble, out of Richmond, Virginia. And then I got tired of, when I was living in McLean, Virginia then, got tired of fighting the traffic, took a job as sales manager of a kitchen cabinet company up in Pennsylvania in '74. Left there in 1977. Started my own business as a kitchen cabinet manufacturer's rep for 2 or 3 different companies, not conflicting with each other, and kept that going. My son David here and another hired person that we had 3 of us in the company. We covered about 13 states, and I think when about 2002 is when we gave up the business. No.
8 or 9.
No.
8 or 9.
2008, 2009, when the whole economy started going, then we gave up the business. We still did a little work in it for a few years afterwards, but I was about, I'd just say that 92, age 92 was maybe time for me to retire.
That's quite a career. All right, well, really impressive.
We raised 4 children, all not doing real well. They had to leave one school and go to another, so I moved about in the Air Force, and they didn't really like that, giving up friends and starting over, and but they all come out real fine, all had successful careers, and we had ups and downs, of course, but we had a good career.
What was your probably the favorite place you ever lived?
What was
your favorite place you were ever stationed at?
Which assignment did you like the best?
Well, I had fun at all of them. Probably Stewart Air Force Base as base commander at that. That was an interesting job. We had a lot of budget work, a lot of building work, a lot of support work up into the millions of dollars, and learning that with a lot of people on the base and supporting the higher headquarters. I learned a lot there and had a good time there, and got to fly quite a bit on both routine and official type flights, all of them. and that C-47, which I liked. So I probably learned the most there. The staff work at the Alaskan Air Command and later was Assistance Command was very interesting. I got a lot of credit for what I was doing, and I just enjoyed it. I like to fly. I was first pilot in 18 different types of aircraft. Didn't take much to get checked out back in those days, and became a command pilot, of course. And as you know, when you get to your commission, you get the shield here in the wings. That's a pilot, and then you get the, forget, 1,000 or 1,500 hours. You get the star on there for a senior pilot. When you get, I don't forget now, it was 1,500 or 2,000 hours and a little better instrument rating, you get a wreath around you're a command pilot. And so I got my time in, enjoyed every bit of it.
What message would you like to leave for future generations that might be viewing this interview?
Well, set some goals. You can change, you know, but set goals, meet your goals. Don't be afraid to do some planning and that. Don't just let nature take its course, see what happens. And then I like the Air Force system. You're on time if you're 5 minutes early. Be on time and take up public speaking. For all the vets out there, tell your stories. Let the younger generation know that, hey, it wasn't all fancy uniforms and parades and flags and lots of things going on. It was mud and trenches and with the Army and airplanes being shot down, your buddies killed and stuff like that. Let the younger generation know what it's all about, the real picture. And you know, you hear that some of them never believe we should have gone to war. We never should have dropped the nuclear bombs. But I've also seen that if we had probably invaded Japan, we could have lost the war. For they were much better prepared to fight street to street than we thought they were. But realistically, let the younger generation know, and you know, I do a lot of public speaking, and I tell people, unless you're 76 years old, the story I'm going to tell you is before you were born.
Well, we really appreciate you telling us your story, and we thank you for your service. Is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't talk about?
No, I appreciate your having me. I might say on June the 7th, I'm speaking to about 250 vets. There's an organization called the Veterans Roundtable, World War II Roundtable, and they do nothing but organize veterans to talk on the first Thursday every month in Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. They got a hold of me. I've been interviewed by them, and they tell me that they just want people to know from vets of that time frame and through Korea and Vietnam also, and even Afghanistan, etc. now today. And I would urge all vets, tell your stories. Tell them to your children. Well, and I thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. All right, well, that concludes the interview of Robert Brocklehurst.